The night over Ypres feels less like sky and more like a ceiling lowered by years of smoke. You drift along the edges of the Western Front, carried on a slow, steady breath of damp wind that has touched everything here. Sandbags, waterlogged earth, the pale wood of duckboards worn smooth by thousands of boots. You don't step into the trenches. You hover just above them, quiet as a memory. Before you drift further into their story, if soft, whispered histories are the way you find sleep, you may take a moment to subscribe, but only if these quiet wartime echoes feel like home to you. And if you wish, tell us where you're listening from, or which moment tonight lingers with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. Below you, men move through the narrow corridors with a kind of practiced resignation, the rhythm of those who no longer expect comfort, only routine. Their helmets glint whenever a flare rises, revealing faces shaped by mud, sleeplessness, and a kind of endurance that defies words. This is rotation week, the endless cycle that defined the Ypres Salient. Front line, support line, reserve, back again. There is no real rest, only gradients of misery. You drift past a group returning from the front line, boots caked so heavily in clay that every step looks like a negotiation with gravity. One man mutters about a collapsed fire step, another about a rat the size of a cat. A third coughs into his sleeve, a wet, rattling sound that tells you he will soon visit the field ambulance, where a doctor will shake his head and say the same phrase he has said for months. Trench lungs again. Nothing to be done but wait. A flare rises. White light washes over the landscape. You see what they see, a world stripped of shape, flattened into silhouettes, sandbags stacked like ribs, wire glistening like frozen spiderwebs, and the faint suggestion of the German line, just beyond the reach of certainty. The light fades. Darkness returns like a blanket thrown over everything. Somewhere, a single round cracks. No one flinches. You settle into the quiet, into the breath of men who have stopped expecting morning. The men push deeper into the reserve line, moving along paths lit only by the faint glimmer of distant lanterns. The light is soft, almost hesitant, as if it fears to disturb anyone who has finally managed to close their eyes. You follow them from above, gliding just ahead of their slow steps. The reserve trenches feel wider, but only because the front line has shrunk their idea of space. Here, the walls lean a little less. The air moves a little more. You can smell damp cloth, stale tobacco, and the faint sweetness of tea warming in a dented pot. A few soldiers settle on wooden benches, boots off, socks steaming gently near a brazier. They do not speak much. Words belong to the front line. Silence belongs here. One man unwraps a letter. Another folds his hands behind his head and looks upward, trying to imagine a sky without flares. Farther along, a doctor checks a young private's breathing. Nothing sudden, nothing alarming, just the slow wear that this place imprints on anyone who stays too long. The doctor's expression carries the familiar mix of worry and routine. He has seen this so many times that even concern now moves with soft, practiced motions. In a shelter, a sergeant writes by candlelight. His pencil moves slowly, as though each sentence must be weighed before it can exist. You can't see the words, but you feel their shape, the kind sent home to reassure someone, even when reassurance has grown thin. Outside, a mule train approaches, hooves landing quietly on the wet earth. The animals breathe warm clouds into the night as they carry crates of food, blankets, and tools, the quiet lifelines that keep a sector functioning. The quartermaster signs for the supplies with a tired nod. This cycle has repeated so many times that the motions feel like part of the landscape. You float a little higher. The Ypres Salient curves below you, a half-ring of suffering held together by determination, habit, and something that sits deeper than either. Men have marched in and out of these lines for years now. Many have walked the same path, so often they could trace it blindfolded. Rotation is the only constant. It moves like a slow tide. Support line. Front line. Reserve. Rebuild. Back again. Each step away from danger feels borrowed. Each step toward it feels inevitable. A distant rumble rolls across the dark fields. Not an explosion, just the deep echo of earth shifting somewhere beyond sight. Even that small sound makes a few men pause. Not out of fear, but out of memory. Here, echoes always carry weight. And you drift with them, sliding quietly into the story of those who lived through this cycle again and again, not because they wanted to, but because the war would not let them stop. The long walk in. The men make their slow approach into the Ypres sector, their silhouettes forming a quiet procession along the narrow communication trench. The path curves gently left, then right, its earthen walls rising high above them like dark waves frozen in place. Lanterns swing from spaced-out beams overhead, glowing softly through mist that clings to everything. This is the beginning they all know by heart. The long walk in. Each step settles heavily on the duckboards, sending small ripples through shallow pools collected in the gaps. The soldiers move with steady restraint, aware of how sound behaves here. Boots lift, land, and lift again in a slow, practiced rhythm that seems almost synchronized. There is a sense of deliberate care in each motion. The trench demands it, and the men have learned to listen. Farther ahead, two soldiers walk side by side, their breath rising as faint clouds in the cool air. One adjusts the strap of his pack. The other holds a small coil of wire against his chest. Neither speaks. Their silence isn't heavy. It's practical. The trench itself absorbs their thoughts, leaving only the cadence of their movement behind. You float above the timber supports lining the trench walls. Each beam is worn smooth by months of rain and hands brushing past. Water drips steadily from the overhead planks, forming a soft, constant rhythm, one of the many quiet signatures of the Ypres Salient. It mingles with the rustle of wool, the shift of gear, the faint tug of fabric against metal. A mule team approaches from farther down the trench. The animals step carefully, ears flicking with every distant sound. Their handlers murmur soft reassurances, guiding them around pools of water and uneven boards. Near the lantern glow that hangs from the mule's pack, the flame trembles slightly as the animal breathes. The warm light touches the walls and reveals scratches left from previous rotations, marks of passage, of labor, of time layering itself in subtle strokes. The trench widens briefly, allowing the men to shift positions. A corporal steps aside to let a pair of stretcher-bearers pass. Their stretcher is empty, just canvas and frame, but they carry it with the same careful reverence as if someone were lying on it. They nod quietly to the others before continuing their route toward the deeper sections. You rise again, watching how the procession stretches and contracts with the trench's narrow curves. No voices rise. No commands break the calm. Only the damp breath of earth and the soft thump of boots mark the passage of time. Near a turn in the trench, a soldier pauses to tighten a strap on his coat. The moment is brief, silent, but meaningful. He checks the knot twice, then steps back into rhythm. A few meters behind him, another man lifts his chin slightly to let cool air reach the damp skin beneath his helmet. The gesture is small, but it speaks to the long hours that lie ahead. A faint glow appears in the distance. The first lantern of the support line. Its light is muted, filtered through layers of mist and timber, but it stands out against the darker maze of the communication trench. The men shift their pace almost imperceptibly, drawn toward the glow with quiet recognition. You drift closer to the lantern site. Tools hang neatly from hooks hammered into the wall. Shovels, saws, coils of rope. A wooden crate sits open beneath them, half filled with folded sandbags. The space feels prepared, ready, waiting. A sergeant at the edge of the support line observes the approaching column. He does not call out. He simply lifts his lantern higher, letting its light expand gently across the path. The soldiers pass him one by one, acknowledging him with small nods. From above, the trench becomes a slow-moving river of wool and metal, flowing toward the deeper heart of the salient. Mist rises around them, gathering in soft curls that catch the lantern light like thin smoke. The world beyond the trench is silent, unseen, and distant, just the faintest outline of ruined trees rising like shadowed teeth against the pale sky. The men take the final steps into the support line, sensing the subtle shift in mood. Not tension, but focus, the quiet acceptance of entering another cycle. This is how every rotation begins. Not with noise, not with urgency, but with a long, steady walk through the breathing corridors of Ypres. You drift forward as the men continue along the trench, and the soft glow of the support line lanterns grows closer. The air changes here, shifting from the cool openness of the communication trench into something more enclosed, warmer, heavier, shaped by the quiet presence of recently used tools, simmering stoves, and the faint lingering scent of smoke. The boards beneath their boots feel different too. Less slick, more worn, imprinted by hundreds of steps taken in the same careful cadence. A soldier near the front slows slightly as he approaches a bend, raising his hand instinctively to steady himself on the timber wall. His glove presses into damp grain, and a small line of water trickles down beside it. He watches the droplet fall, not with interest, but with calm recognition, a familiar detail in a place where small things matter. Farther back, a soldier adjusts his helmet strap with slow, practiced movements. He pulls it once, twice, then settles it against his chin. Not a sign of worry, just preparation. Ypres teaches the men that readiness grows from quiet repetition, not urgency. A faint breeze drifts along the trench, carrying the smell of wet earth and something metallic, tools that have cooled after a day of work, or perhaps the wire stored in bundles further ahead. The men sense it and shift their shoulders, inhaling deeply as the air fills their lungs with the steady rhythm of the sector they've come to know so well. You float near a recess carved into the wall, where a few wooden crates rest beneath a slanted plank. One crate is marked with chalk, a simple line, a number, a symbol. Another holds a lantern with soot-blackened glass. A third contains tightly folded sandbags. None of these speak loudly, yet each one shapes the trench as surely as the men themselves. The group pauses briefly as the path narrows. They wait. No words spoken, just a collective slowing of movement, a soft tightening of formation. One by one, they step through the narrow gap. You hover above them, watching how they lean slightly forward as they pass, aware of how little space lies between their shoulders and the sandbag walls. Their breath rises in gentle clouds that waver before slipping upward through the mist. A soldier near the rear lifts his hand to touch the edge of a wooden sign fixed to the wall. The lettering has faded almost to nothing, weathered by rain, rubbed by passing gloves, but he traces it anyway, as though the memory of its message still lingers in the grain. You drift alongside him as he continues walking, his boots falling into the same soft pattern of steps that has carried the men through countless rotations. Step, lift, settle, a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Ahead, another soldier shifts the weight of the small bundle he carries, a coil of rope resting against his hip. The rope presses into fabric, leaving faint impressions that match the contours of his body. He adjusts it with care, looping it once more over his shoulder to ease the strain. When the rope settles into place, he exhales quietly. The lantern-bearer glances back, not to speak, but to check that everyone is still with him. His lantern swings slightly, its glow stretching and contracting along the damp boards. The men blink gently as the light shifts, their eyes adjusting to the soft dance of brightness and shadow. You rise again, watching the trench stretch out in front of the procession like a long, winding corridor of earth and timber. From above, the lanterns resemble small pockets of warmth scattered along a dark artery of the Salient. The curves of the trench feel almost organic, shaped by months of weather and the countless hands that maintain it. The group passes a shallow drainage channel cut along one wall. Water trickles through it in steady, patient motion. The sound is subtle but present, a quiet reminder that everything here is always shifting, always wearing down, always needing care. A soldier crouches briefly to tighten his bootlace. Another gives a small, silent nod as he steps around him. These gestures form a language of their own, a language built not on urgency but on understanding, the kind that only comes from months of shared movement through the same long paths. As they reach the edge of the support line, the men slow once more, not hesitating, simply attuning to the new space. The lanterns glow a little brighter here. Tools hang in orderly rows. The smell of damp cloth mixes with the faint scent of a stove that was recently extinguished. The sergeant steps aside, allowing the column to enter. The men flow past him with quiet respect, each acknowledging his presence with the smallest tilt of the head. They set their tools down, preparing for the next part of the routine. Calm, steady, patient. This is the true beginning of the rotation, not marked by any single moment, but by the gradual settling into the rhythm of the support line, a rhythm old as the salient itself. Between front and support. The men enter the support line fully, and the air shifts again, not as heavy as the front, not as loose as the reserve. The support line is a world balanced between tension and purpose, a place where movement never truly stops but rarely rises to urgency. It's the quiet machinery that keeps the front alive. The trench widens slightly here, enough for two men to pass each other without turning sideways. Sandbags rise high on either side, stacked in careful layers that slope inward. Wooden struts brace the walls, each one marked with faint indentations from countless hands that steadied themselves while passing through. A lantern hangs from a timber beam overhead, its glow forming a soft golden pool across the mud. You drift toward it, sensing how the men naturally gravitate to that warmth, even if only for a moment. Light is not just illumination here, it is companionship. A corporal gestures toward a narrow corner where sections of the wall have sagged. Two soldiers step forward instinctively. They kneel without instruction, pressing gloved hands against the sandbags to feel the pressure. The earth beneath is soft from recent rain, and the men exchange the smallest nods as they begin clearing space for new supports. Their movements are steady, almost rhythmic. Scoop, press, adjust. The calm choreography of maintenance. Nearby, a small group sorts through a crate of tools. The crate's lid rests on the ground beside them, warped slightly from long exposure to damp. The soldiers test handles, check blades, wipe moisture from metal edges with slow strokes. One man holds a length of timber, examining its grain by lantern light before passing it on to another who tests its balance in his hands. A soldier rests momentarily beside a stack of sandbags. He rubs the back of his neck beneath his helmet, feeling the damp cloth cling to his skin. His breath leaves him in a long, quiet stream, not fatigue exactly, but adjustment. The support line demands a different type of readiness, and the body takes its time falling into that rhythm. From the far end of the trench comes a soft metallic rattle, a wheelbarrow being guided around a tight bend. The man pushing it moves carefully, watching the ground as he eases the wheel over slick boards. The faint squeak of metal blends with a steady dripping from overhead planks, creating a subtle undertone to the sector's ambient hum. You rise as the work groups position themselves along the trench walls. Each one settles into a small pocket of activity, not rushed and not idle. The support line breathes through them, a series of quiet, measured motions. A soldier unfolds a length of wire netting and lays it across a damaged section. His companion holds it in place while he secures the edges with short, precise tugs. They speak only through gesture, shifting their weight as they follow the curve of the wall. Lantern light slides along the wires, catching on droplets of moisture clinging to each thin strand. Farther along, a man kneels beside a drainage channel. He reaches into the water with careful fingers, clearing a small obstruction made of leaves and debris washed down from the front. The current brightens after the blockage lifts, creating a faint shimmer beneath the lantern's glow. He watches it for a moment, then nods quietly to himself before rising. A soldier sits there briefly, tightening the strap of his puttee with slow, deliberate motions. He wraps the cloth more snugly around his shin, tucking the end in place where it won't loosen during the long hours ahead. When he stands, he presses his hand against the bench in a gesture of balance, leaving a faint, damp print on the wood. The sergeant walks the line, speaking in low tones. He checks the work, adjusts a beam with a small gesture, nods to the group clearing mud near the parapet. His presence is steadying, not heavy-handed, not distant, but grounded. The men take quiet reassurance in the way he moves, confident, unhurried, certain. The trench hums softly around him. Dripping water, boots shifting on wet boards, tools tapping gently against sandbags. The occasional sigh from a man stretching his back. None of it is loud. None of it is sharp. But together, these sounds form the heartbeat of the support line. You drift upward one more time, watching the men from above as they settle into the steady pace of their work. Lanterns glow along the trench like a string of muted stars, guiding the movement of tools and silhouettes with gentle certainty. The air holds them all in place, suspended between front and reserve, between tension and release, between what has happened and what will come. This is where quiet labor sustains everything else. This is where endurance takes shape long before the men ever reach the front. And the rotation continues. You drift further into the support line as the men continue their quiet routines. The lanterns pulse gently with each shift of air, their flames swaying like small, patient signals guiding the night. Every corner of this space feels shaped by hands, breath, and footsteps, a lived-in corridor of calm labor. The trench bends to the left, creating a shallow alcove where boards have been stacked in uneven piles. Two soldiers kneel there now, sorting through the planks. They lift each one, feeling the dampness, testing for soft spots. Some boards are set aside, others are placed into neat piles for use. The motions are slow, steady, purposeful. As they work, the water beneath the duckboards murmurs quietly, a thin trickle moving along a carved channel. The sound merges with the soft tapping of a hammer in the distance, a calm rhythm echoing through timber and earth. A soldier is standing near a narrow fire step. He places one boot on the step, testing its stability, then presses down a little harder. The board bends slightly but holds. He nods, satisfied. His breath escapes in a faint ribbon of mist. For a moment, he rests his gloved hand against the wall, letting the cool sandbags ease the warmth of his palm. Farther along, two men squat beside a series of wooden braces. One holds a plank upright while the other drives a stake into the ground with a slow, deliberate motion. The metal head of the hammer catches the lantern light in brief flashes, not bright, just soft glimmers that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Nearby, a corporal moves through the trench with quiet assessment. He stops at a section of wall where a thin crack has opened between sandbags. He presses a thumb into the seam, feeling the give beneath the surface. He calls over a pair of soldiers with a gentle nod, and they immediately gather their tools to reinforce the area. No words needed. The cycles here teach a language of gestures and shared habits. You lean downward, closer to the boards beneath their feet. The mud is thick in some places, thin in others, marked with impressions of boots and tools. The duckboards creak softly when the men shift their weight, the kind of familiar sound that doesn't startle anyone. It simply joins the ambient hum of the support line, another thread in the fabric of the night. At the next turn in the trench, the path widens enough for a short bench to sit against the wall. A soldier rests on it briefly, rolling his shoulder to ease the ache of hours spent lifting. His helmet sits low over his brow, and he tilts it back slightly to let the lantern glow warm the skin of his face. He closes his eyes for just a moment, inhaling deeply, not sleeping, not even drifting, just letting his body acknowledge the pause. You move closer to the group clearing mud from the firing step. One man scoops dense muck into a canvas bag while another holds the opening wide. Their breathing synchronizes without thought, lifting, scraping, lifting again. The sound of mud settling into the bag is soft, almost like the patter of distant rain. The lantern nearby flickers. One soldier steadies it with a careful touch of his hand. Its glow steadies again, stretching a warm circle across the wall. A mule handler appears from a side trench, guiding his animal with slow, calming motions. The mule steps carefully, its hooves making gentle thuds against the boards. Breath rises in soft clouds from both man and animal. The handler pats the mule's flank, murmuring something barely audible, then leads it toward a crate of wrapped supplies. From above, the trench looks like a line of connected pockets of motion, each group absorbed in its task, each lantern forming a small oasis of warmth. The night presses softly around them. The sound of distant frontline activity is faint, muted by layers of earth and distance. And yet the support line holds its own kind of gravity. Not danger, not fear, but a quiet expectation. The men work with the awareness that these small tasks, replacing boards, clearing channels, shoring up walls, will determine how the next rotation unfolds. Their movements are born of routine, but not all routine is meaningless. Here, it is a form of care, a form of resilience. At the far end of the trench, the sergeant gives a small gesture. It's time to move further along, time to continue the arc of the night. The men gather their tools with measured motions, lifting handles, tightening straps, shifting weight from one leg to the other. The lantern swings gently as the group begins its slow procession deeper into the support line. The trench curves again, guiding them toward the next task, the next quiet moment, the next breath in the long rotation. And the night continues its patient rhythm. Water and clay. The ground changes. What began as firm boards and compacted earth slowly dissolves into something softer, a mixture of clay, rainwater, and long-trodden mud that has shaped the Salient for years. This mixture defines Ypres more than any map ever could. It clings to everything: boots, tools, memory. You settle just above the trench floor as a soldier steps forward carefully, testing the strength of a duckboard before committing his weight. His boot presses down with a slow, deliberate motion. The wood creaks but holds. He nods once and continues, lifting his other foot with the same cautious patience. The mud here is not just wet. It has a kind of slow pull to it, a quiet force that absorbs whatever lingers too long in one place. Along the wall, sandbags have slumped inward under the pressure of countless storms. Some have burst, spilling clay in small heaps that resemble collapsed shoulders. Others sag like softened pillows, their fabric weakened by years of moisture. A pair of men work to reinforce them, lifting fresh bags into place with a steady rhythm. Their movements are slow, not from reluctance, but from necessity. In this kind of ground, every task requires twice the effort. A few meters ahead, water collects in a shallow basin formed by a broken board. The surface glimmers faintly, reflecting lantern light through a delicate film of floating clay. A soldier steps around it instinctively. He has learned that even a small puddle here might hide a deeper hollow beneath. The men, they adjust to this landscape. They do not resent the mud. They respect it, the way someone respects a constant companion who refuses to change. Near a narrow elbow in the trench, a pair of sappers inspect a drainage pipe. One holds a lantern low, letting the beam skim the surface of the water. The other clears debris with slow, careful motions. Their tools move in smooth arcs. Their boots are planted firmly to avoid slipping. The sound of water trickling through the pipe is soft but reassuring. It means the line will hold a little longer. Farther along, a man kneels to scrape mud from his boots with a short wooden stick. The mud comes off in thick ribbons, landing with a soft thud on the ground beside him. He pauses, breathes out slowly, and continues. This is not frustration. This is ritual, the kind that repeats in every rotation. In a small recess carved into the trench wall, a lantern flickers near a stack of wooden panels waiting to be laid. A corporal measures each board with his hands, judging their shape and strength before carrying them forward. He selects one, lifts it onto his shoulder, and begins walking with a steady, practiced gait. The weight does not slow him. He has carried hundreds. Above, a section in the mud rises nearly to the height of a man's shin. The boards here have shifted under pressure, leaving uneven gaps that must be crossed with care. Two soldiers move through this section together, each step synchronized as if rehearsed. One tests a board, the other follows. When a plank bends too deeply, they adjust their path without a word. There is a quiet unity in this place, not the unity of speeches or ceremonies, but of shared struggle against an environment that refuses to yield. The trench walls glisten with moisture. The air smells of clay, timber, and cold rain, and every movement feels deliberate, slow, and deeply human. Ypres was shaped by battles, but it was held together by mud, and by the men who learned to navigate it without losing themselves to weariness. You hear the soft ripple of water settling along the trench floor. The night presses gently from above, and the men continue forward, patient and steady, following the familiar path carved through earth and rain. The farther you drift along this trench, the more you sense how water defines everything here. It seeps through the soil, rises from the ground, and settles in every low point. Even the air carries traces of it, a cool heaviness that softens each breath and clings to the surface of skin and cloth. You follow the slow curve of the trench until it dips slightly, and there you find a small group of men working in the dim glow of two lanterns. They stand ankle-deep in mud, lifting timbers into place to brace the wall. The wood is slick, the ground unsteady, yet their movements remain careful and coordinated. One man steadies a post while the other taps it into position with a gentle, repeated motion. Each tap sinks into the night like a soft heartbeat, slow, steady, patient. A few steps away, a soldier strains to lift a board wedged deep in the mud. He leans forward, grips tightly, and pulls with a long, quiet effort. The board finally gives, rising with a slow, wet release. He doesn't celebrate. He simply sets it aside and reaches for the next one. The task will take time. He knows that. Everyone here knows that. He wipes the mud from his gloves onto his trouser leg, the gesture familiar and unthinking. His eyes move across the trench floor, studying the shape of the ground the way someone might study the face of an old friend. He knows its patterns, its moods, its dangers. Farther along, you hover above a section where water has formed a shallow pool, its surface broken only by the soft ripple of a man stepping through it. His boots sink slightly, making a quiet sucking sound that fades as soon as he lifts his foot. He moves with a calm awareness, distributing his weight gently so he doesn't lose balance. The water reflects the faint lantern light, creating shifting bands of gold and brown that dance across the mud. A little higher up the trench wall, wooden planks have been nailed at an angle to help direct rainwater downward. The planks are worn smooth by months of weather, their edges discolored by constant moisture. As you pass, droplets trace thin lines along their surfaces, gathering at the bottom before falling in soft, rhythmic intervals. The men who built this system knew the ground would win every long contest. The goal was never to stop the water, only to guide it, slow it, and make its presence manageable. Survival in the Salient meant accepting the landscape, not fighting it. You drift into a small recess where two soldiers crouch near a drainage ditch. They use short-handled shovels, scooping out sediment in calm, methodical motions. Each scoop is measured, each movement deliberate. They work quietly, almost meditatively, as though they've learned that doing this in silence helps them endure it. One pauses, adjusts the lantern beside him, and wipes his brow with the back of his wrist. His hair is damp, not from sweat alone, but from the constant moisture in the air. He resumes his work without complaint. The ditch must be cleared, not to make the trench comfortable, but simply to prevent it from collapsing under its own weight. You rise above this scene. From here, the trench resembles a narrow river of clay winding through dark fields, its path shaped by hands, storms, and time. The men in it move like steady currents, each gesture flowing into the next, each task part of a larger rhythm. It is a world defined by mud and patience, a place where endurance grows not from strength, but from quiet persistence. Above you, the sky hangs low and heavy. Below you, the ground pulls gently at everything it touches. And through it all, the men continue, step by slow step, breath by breath, shaping their path through water and clay. Sound over the Salient. You rise slightly above the support line and drift into a stretch where sound becomes the defining shape of the night. Ypres is never truly silent. Even in its quietest hours, something moves across the air, distant, near, familiar, or strange, weaving an unseen tapestry that the men have learned to read as carefully as any map. The first sound you notice is the soft pulse of artillery far beyond the horizon. It is not sharp, not sudden, just a deep rumble that rolls slowly through the earth, spreading beneath your feet like a long exhale. The men hardly react. To them, this is background, a distant reminder of battles happening somewhere else in the dark. They pause only long enough to register direction and distance, then continue their work with the same steady pace as before. The texture of sound changes. A loose plank shifts under a man's boot. A quiet clatter of tin cups inside a dugout. A lantern chain tapping lightly against its hook. These small sounds carry surprising clarity in the damp air. The trench seems to amplify anything soft while swallowing anything sharp. Farther along, a faint rustle emerges from the trench wall. A rat slips out from behind a sandbag, its movements quick but unhurried. It pauses, whiskers testing the air, then disappears into another crevice without disturbing anyone. The men have grown so used to these nocturnal companions that they barely register their passing. A group stacks wooden planks. Their movements create a low thud each time a board settles into place, not hard or abrupt, but cushioned by layers of mud and moisture. The rhythm is almost soothing. Lift, place, shift, settle. A little farther on, the trench opens slightly where a sap runs forward. A cool breeze drifts through the gap, carrying the faint murmur of voices from deeper along the line. Not conversation, just the gentle hum of men coordinating tasks, passing tools, adjusting equipment. The tones are soft, meant not to travel far. Above, the sky flickers with light from distant flares. You cannot hear their launch, too far, but you can sense the muted glow they cast across the clouds. The men glance upward only briefly. They understand that sound travels unevenly through the salient. A flare seen might not be a flare heard. A noise heard might come from miles away. In a narrow bend of the trench, a soldier adjusts the straps on a mule's harness. The animal stomps once, sending a quiet tremor through the boards. The soldier murmurs something calm, steady. The mule settles. Its breathing slows. The sound of that breath, warm and gentle, fills the small space with surprising comfort. A little farther along, you pause at a dugout door. Inside, a man hums softly while sealing a wooden crate. The tune is simple, barely more than a few notes strung together, yet it brings a faint warmth to the night. Another man listens with half-closed eyes, letting the melody settle into the quiet. The soundscape here is a mosaic. Distant thunder from unseen guns, soft rustle of clothing against damp walls, the low rhythm of work continuing through the dark. And woven through all of it is a subtle stillness, not silence, but the sense of a world holding its breath. The men understand these sounds deeply. They know which ones carry danger, which ones carry routine, which ones allow them to relax, even for a moment. The support line stretches beneath you like a long corridor of muted noise, every sound softened by mud and mist. This is the voice of the salient, subtle, steady, always present. You drift deeper into the trench, and the pattern of sound shifts gently once more. Nothing here is loud. Nothing here is abrupt. Even the smallest noises carry a softened edge, shaped by the damp walls and the earth that surrounds everything. At a narrow dogleg in the trench, a man adjusts a lantern fixed to a wooden beam. The metal frame clicks lightly as he sets it straight. The flame inside flickers, casting a warm glow across the mud. You can hear the lantern's small movements, the faint tap of metal, the soft sway of the hook, clearer than anything beyond the parapet. Nearby, another soldier sits on an overturned crate, brushing mud from his trousers with long, smooth strokes. Each motion creates a quiet rasp, almost like paper being folded slowly. His expression is calm, his shoulders relaxed. He works with a rhythm that suggests not impatience, but familiarity. A few steps ahead, the trench widens just enough to form a tiny alcove where a group of men has gathered around a kettle. The water inside simmers steadily, its soft bubbling blending with the low murmur of their voices. They are not talking about anything urgent. Their words drift gently between them, shaped by the kind of tired comfort that only emerges late at night. The kettle releases a faint hiss as steam escapes from its lid. One of the men lifts it carefully, pouring hot water into tin cups. The sound of liquid meeting metal is quiet but clear, filling the space with a warmth that the fire alone cannot provide. You drift past them, drawn toward a section of trench where the ground rises slightly. Here, the boards are more stable, and the air moves more freely. A light breeze carries the smell of wet earth and the quiet chirp of an unseen night bird perched somewhere beyond the trench line. Its call is soft, short, and almost hesitant, as though uncertain about making itself known in this place. The men listen without reacting, yet you sense the subtle effect it has on them. Even the smallest reminders of the world beyond the war hold a gentle power here. Farther along, a runner moves carefully through the trench, holding a folded message close to his chest. His pace is steady. His boots land softly on the boards, creating a calm, repetitive pattern, tap, slide, tap, that echoes down the narrow corridor. He nods to a sentry as he passes, and the sentry returns the gesture before settling back into stillness. At another bend, a mule shifts its weight, causing its harness to creak in a slow, rounded tone. The handler pats its neck with a reassuring touch, and the animal exhales, sending a warm breath into the night air. That breath seems to linger for a moment before fading into the cool mist that hangs above the trench. From above, the sound of the support line resembles a soft, continuous murmur, never fully rising, never falling into silence. It is the sound of men adjusting to the night, making space for rest wherever they can, and keeping the line alive through small acts of steady work. The night deepens gradually. The lanterns dim as their flames settle, and the sounds that define Ypres slip into an even gentler rhythm. A shovel resting against sandbags, a man shifting in his greatcoat, a distant ripple of water moving through a drainage pipe. You feel the Salient breathing, slow, patient, constant. These sounds do not disturb the men. They support them. They remind them that despite the darkness, the world continues moving in quiet harmony. Small rituals of the reserve. You drift with the men as they move into the reserve line, and a noticeable shift settles over the group, like the deep exhale taken after holding breath for too long. The trench widens here, the walls leaning back as though giving the men a little more space to inhabit. Lanterns burn brighter. Blankets hang from wooden pegs. The air carries the faint scent of tea, wood smoke, and will drying slowly near a small stove. For the first time in hours, the men's shoulders ease. One by one, they settle into the small pockets of comfort shaped by the reserve line. You drift close to a dugout where two soldiers sit on a low bench, steam rising from mugs cupped between their hands. The warmth softens their expressions. One blows gently across the surface of his tea. The other watches the swirling steam as though studying a shifting landscape. They speak quietly, their voices barely above whispers, not out of caution, but because the reserve line has its own softness, its own gravity that pulls conversations into gentle tones. Farther inside the dugout, a soldier sorts through a small parcel he received earlier that week. He unfolds each item with careful hands, a square of chocolate wrapped tightly in paper, a pair of knitted socks, a small folded letter tucked between them. He places the socks on his lap and lifts the letter, tracing a finger along the creases. He doesn't open it yet. He simply holds it, letting the anticipation create its own warmth. Another group is gathered around a tiny stove. The fire glows softly behind its metal frame, casting shimmering patterns along the timber walls. One man warms his hands just above the grate, slowly rotating his palms. Another sits cross-legged nearby, rubbing wax along the edge of his rifle sling. He works with slow, intentional motions, polishing the worn fabric as though smoothing the day itself. A harmonica sounds from deeper in the dugout, a low, gentle tune that settles into the air like breath. Not a song for performance. Not a song for memory. Just sound shaped by quiet hands, meant for no one and everyone at once. Some men listen. Others continue their tasks, writing letters, patching socks, organizing kit. The harmonica's thin melody weaves through it all, turning the dugout into a small island of calm suspended within the vast, restless Salient. One man bends over a crate, the paper resting on his knee where lantern light falls just right. He holds the pencil lightly, thinking before each sentence. Now and then, he taps the pencil's tip against the page, leaving a faint mark that looks almost like a tiny heartbeat. Another folds his letter carefully after finishing it. He presses the edges with the flat of his hand, smoothing creases, then tucks it into an envelope he seals with a small smear of candle wax. He doesn't write an address immediately. He waits, as though giving the letter a moment to settle into the shape it needs to be. You drift toward a soldier sitting on the floor, a blanket draped across his legs. He holds a photograph in his hands, a small, worn print whose edges have curled with age and damp. He studies it quietly, his thumb brushing across the image, not out of longing exactly, but out of a gentle familiarity, a connection that has survived through countless rotations. Another man nearby adjusts a small lantern, tightening its wire frame before placing it at the center of their small space. Its glow fills the dugout with warm light, softening every shadow. The room responds to it. Boots gleaming faintly, steam rising more clearly from mugs, letter paper glowing softly like pale gold. You drift back toward the stove. A soldier sets a kettle atop it, water sloshing faintly inside. He sits back on his heels, resting his forearms on his thighs as he waits. The heat from the stove rises, warming his face and softening the tightness in his jaw. None of the men speak loudly. None of them hurry. Every gesture, folding a blanket, stirring tea, adjusting a lantern, feels like a ritual shaped by necessity and comfort alike. These small rituals of the reserve line give shape to the quiet hours between labor and return. They restore breath. They steady minds. They turn the long rotations into something bearable. And as you drift among them, the warmth feels almost tangible, a brief refuge carved gently into the long rhythm of Ypres. You continue drifting through the reserve line as the men settle deeper into these soft pockets of rest. The lanterns hum gently, their flames bending slightly with each subtle shift of air. The faint whistle of the kettle builds slowly, a quiet promise of warmth. A soldier near the entrance to the dugout removes his boots, setting them gently near the stove to dry. His socks steam slightly from the heat. He wiggles his toes slowly, stretching them after hours pressed inside wet leather. The relief that crosses his face is small but unmistakable, the kind of comfort that doesn't require words. Another man kneels beside a crate and empties the contents of his pockets. A small pencil stub, a few cartridges, a folded scrap of paper, a button he intends to sew back on. He arranges everything neatly on the crate's surface, then begins wiping mud from each item with meticulous care. The act is simple, almost meditative. A pair of soldiers share a blanket draped over their shoulders. They sit close to the wall, resting their backs against the timber. One taps a steady rhythm on his cup, soft, slow, like a heartbeat settling after exertion. The other hums quietly, almost under his breath, a tune too faint to follow, but steady enough to bring a sense of calm to the space around them. A soldier in the corner removes his greatcoat and hangs it on a wooden peg. Beneath it, his uniform is damp in patches, darkened by the weight of the trench's moisture. He smooths the fabric along his forearm, then sits and warms his hands near the stove. His eyes drift half-closed, not in sleep, but in a moment suspended between fatigue and peace. Another man opens a tin of tobacco. He taps a small portion into the palm of his hand, then rolls it carefully onto a thin strip of paper. His fingers move with practiced precision. When he finishes, he holds the cigarette near the lantern flame, watching the tip glow softly. He takes one slow breath, then passes the cigarette to the soldier beside him before he ever draws from it himself. You drift toward a different pocket of the dugout where a man has spread a blanket on the floor. He sits cross-legged atop it, polishing the metal buckle of his webbing. The light catches along its edge, creating brief flashes like distant stars. After polishing, he sets the buckle aside and begins folding the blanket at his feet. Folding, smoothing, aligning edges, then unfolding and folding again. A quiet ritual that soothes the mind through careful repetition. At the far end of the dugout, a kettle finally begins to boil. The soldier tending it lifts it carefully and pours water into several mugs lined neatly on a crate. Steam rises in gentle curls. The smell of tea fills the space, warm and earthy. One soldier takes his mug and sits near the entrance, letting the cooler air mix with the warmth of the drink. His eyes track the light shifting along the walls. He doesn't speak, doesn't move much. He simply exists in this moment, letting the taste anchor him. A soft laugh emerges from a pair of men sharing a tiny tin of jam. One dips his spoon and offers a small portion to the other, who accepts with a faint smile. The gesture is small, but it carries the weight of camaraderie built across countless rotations. You drift upward, seeing the dugout from above, a constellation of lantern-lit rituals unfolding in slow harmony. Every movement, every sip of tea, every folded blanket echoes the same truth. This is where the men rebuild themselves, not through sleep alone, but through these simple, soft acts that remind them of who they are beneath the mud and routine. And as the reserve line hums with this quiet warmth, the night outside waits patiently for the next rotation, knowing these moments are what make the return possible. Holding on to warmth. The reserve line settles into its gentlest shape. The dugouts breathe with a slow, steady warmth, and the men inside shift into softer postures, shoulders lowered, hands loose, movements unhurried. This part of the rotation is less about rest and more about gathering strength, piece by quiet piece. A soldier sits beside a crate, unlacing his boots with deliberate care. He pulls each lace through its eyelet slowly, as though savoring the relief with every loosened knot. When the boots finally ease off, he exhales quietly, placing them neatly beside him to dry. He rubs his feet beneath the blanket draped over his legs, warming them with slow circles of his palms. You see another man who carefully unwraps a packet of biscuits from his kit. He breaks one in half, sets the larger piece aside, and lets the smaller portion rest on his tongue. He doesn't chew. He allows it to soften gradually, letting the faint sweetness spread across his breath. The moment lasts only seconds, but it roots him, grounding him gently inside the routine of the night. A lantern nearby flickers softly, its light wavering along the dugout wall. One soldier rises and adjusts the wick with practiced fingers, steadying the flame. When the light stabilizes, he taps the lantern once, almost affectionately, before sitting again. The glow warms his face, softening the lines carved by the long march and steady labor. You notice a man sorting through his small bundle of letters. He unfolds one carefully, smoothing out creases with the flat of his hand. He reads a few lines silently, lips moving just enough to shape the words again. Then he folds the letter back up and tucks it into the inner pocket of his coat, close to his chest, where the fabric is warmest. Another soldier dips a rag into a tin of oil and begins to wipe down the metal of his bayonet, not out of fear of what waits ahead, but because the simple, repetitive motion steadies him. Oil spreads smoothly along steel, catching lantern light in warm reflections. His expression softens with each pass of the cloth. A low murmur rises from a group gathered near the stove. They speak in half sentences, resting their words between long pauses. One tells a story not with drama, but with the softness of someone remembering something small and comforting. A hill behind his childhood home, the sound of rain on a shed roof, the taste of warm bread from a neighbor's kitchen. The others listen with eyes half closed, leaning toward the warmth. A soldier pulls a folded scrap of fabric from his pack. It's a handkerchief, washed, neatly sewn, its edges still smelling faintly of lavender soap. He holds it to his nose for a moment before placing it carefully inside his breast pocket. Tiny, gentle rituals. Ways of holding warmth when the world outside is cold and indifferent. A man at the far end of the dugout begins mending a tear in his greatcoat. The needle moves slowly through the thick fabric, each stitch deliberate and unhurried. He pauses now and then to adjust the thread or reposition the coat, but he never rushes. The work soothes him, grounding him in the rhythm of needle and cloth. Men sit in small circles or alone, each finding warmth in his own way. Through tea, through letters, through the glow of a lantern, through the simple act of carefully folding a blanket. None of it is dramatic. None of it is grand. But all of it matters. Because in the slow rotation of the Salient, these are the moments that keep a man steady. These are the moments that hold him together. You drift deeper into the reserve line as the night thickens softly around the dugouts. The warmth here is not loud or bright. It gathers slowly, shaped by breath, lanterns, blankets, and the quiet presence of men finally allowed to loosen their grip on the day. A soldier sits cross-legged on a low platform, a small tin mirror propped against a crate. He doesn't shave. The blade lies untouched beside him, but he studies his reflection for a moment, as though reacquainting himself with a face beneath the mud and exhaustion. He touches his cheek with the back of his fingers, testing the stubble, then wipes a smudge of dirt from his chin with a damp cloth. Not vanity, just recognition. A man is polishing the brass buckle of his webbing with slow, circular motions. He steadies the strap across his knee and works patiently, letting the metal catch the lantern glow. When he stops to blow gently across the surface, the buckle fogs briefly and then clears again, gleaming faintly. He sets it aside with quiet satisfaction, as though restoring a small part of himself. Nearby, two men share a quiet moment of tea. One holds the tin mug between both hands, drawing warmth into his palms. The other leans his elbows on a crate, staring into the cup's pale surface as steam curls upward. They speak occasionally, but mostly they drink in silence, letting the heat ease the tension gathered in their shoulders. Farther in the dugout, a man pulls out a worn notebook from his tunic. Its pages are soft from use, corners bent, entries written in cramped lines. He flips through several pages before stopping near the middle. He stares at the words for a moment, perhaps dates, perhaps names, perhaps thoughts he hasn't revisited in months. He adds a few slow lines, shaping each letter with careful attention. When he closes the notebook, he tucks it gently inside his coat, close to where he feels his heartbeat. You drift toward another pocket of the room where a soldier removes a small wooden carving from his pocket, a shape worn smooth by handling. No larger than a thumb, perhaps a keepsake or a simple piece of wood he's shaped over quiet nights. He rolls it between his fingers, letting the warmth of his hand seep into the grain. The object carries no obvious symbolism, yet it steadies him, something familiar amid the shifting routine. Near the stove, a man unwraps a parcel of food. Inside is a piece of bread, darker and firmer than when it first reached him days ago. He tears it carefully, offering a small portion to the soldiers beside him. They accept with quiet nods, eating slowly, letting the taste settle on their tongues like something remembered. You watch a few men stretching out as much as the space allows, boots removed, legs extended, blankets pulled loosely across their laps. They lean back against the timber wall, feeling the warmth radiate from the stove. Eyes half closed, faces softened, breaths deep. Not asleep, but resting in a way that sleep alone cannot provide. A soft murmur rises from the corner where two soldiers compare postcards, each holding a small, weathered rectangle of home. They exchange a few quiet comments, pointing to details only they can see in the dim lantern light: a doorway, a field, a street corner familiar only to one. The conversation fades into a shared silence, a companionable stillness wrapped gently in memory. You drift toward the dugout entrance, where a soldier sits with a blanket draped across his shoulders. He watches the faint lantern glow outside, where mist curls along the trench floor like slow-moving breath. He takes a sip of cooled tea, then rests the cup on his knee, letting his hands settle loosely around it. His eyes follow the shifting shadows, thoughtful but unburdened. These are the moments that hold the men together. Moments of warmth gathered in small rituals. Moments of contact with home. Moments when the world beyond the dugout feels distant but not lost. And as go, you sense how these quiet routines, drying boots, folding blankets, polishing metal, reading letters, form the scaffolding of their endurance. Not strength in the loud sense, but strength shaped from gentleness, held together by breath, passed from man to man like the faint glow of a lantern. The slow weight of fatigue. You drift into a part of the reserve line where the lanterns burn lower, not out of neglect, but because the men themselves grow quieter, slower, heavier. This is where fatigue settles, not sharply, not suddenly, but like a soft blanket laid over every movement. The trench here feels wider, yet emptier. A stillness fills the air, shaped by the exhaustion of men who have worked, marched, repaired, hauled, and endured for longer than they can count. You hover above a man sitting on a crate, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed slightly. His eyes are closed, not fully asleep, just resting behind lowered lids. His breath comes slow and even, the kind of breath taken only when the body finally pauses after carrying weight for too long. Next to him, another soldier removes his boots with steady, mechanical motions. The laces slip through the eyelets with a soft, rhythmic sound. When he finally frees his foot, he sighs, a low, quiet release that carries more truth than words ever could. He stretches his toes, rubbing warmth back into them with slow circles of his palm. Farther along, a young private sits with his back against the trench wall. His shoulders slump gently, his hands resting loosely on his lap. He stares at nothing in particular, just the blurred world in front of him, softened by exhaustion. His breathing remains calm, but his gaze drifts in and out of focus, as though he is hovering between waking and something deeper. You drift closer and sense the heaviness in the air. It is not fear, not tension, just the slow weight of months upon months of trench life settling into every limb. In a dugout nearby, men lie stretched on bunks, boots tucked under their blankets to keep them dry. A lantern burns faintly above them, its glow making shadows gently sway against the wooden beams. A few men sleep with their mouths slightly open, breath rising and falling in quiet harmony. Others lie awake, staring at the ceiling, too tired to sleep yet too worn to rise. One man shifts, pulling his blanket higher around his shoulders. Another rubs the bridge of his nose, trying to ease the dull ache behind his eyes. Another whispers a soft hum, more instinct than intention, letting the vibration bring a moment of calm. You step back into the trench. A sergeant leans against the wall, arms folded loosely. His chin dips toward his chest as his eyes flutter open and closed. He knows he should stay alert, but the fatigue is deep, steady, unrelenting. Still, he remains standing, anchored by duty more than strength. Nearby, a soldier stirs a small pot resting on a burner. He moves slowly, carefully, as though every motion requires conscious effort. When he lifts the spoon to taste, He holds it there for a moment, letting the warmth cut through the fog of tiredness settling behind his eyes. At the far end of this stretch, a man sits cross-legged with a notebook open, pencil resting loosely in his fingers. He tries to write, but his head droops slightly with each passing second. The pencil touches the page, then slips, leaving a faint line. He blinks, adjusts his posture, and tries again. You drift slightly higher. From above, this part of the reserve line feels like a slowed heartbeat. Movements soften. Voices drop. The night stretches gently around those who rest and those who try to. Ypres has its own way of wearing men down, not through sudden terror, but through the quiet accumulation of days. And here, in the dim lantern glow, you feel the full weight of that endurance, the kind that does not shout or collapse, but bends slowly like a branch bearing too much snow. These moments of fatigue do not break them. They simply reveal how much they have already carried. You drift deeper into the reserve line, where the night has thickened and the lamps burn lower, their flames shrinking into small, steady embers. The world feels slowed, as though each movement must pass through a layer of heavy air before finding its place. Here, fatigue becomes something almost physical, a quiet presence settling onto shoulders, into joints, behind eyes. You sense it in the way the men move, the way they breathe, the way they fold into spaces meant for rest but shaped by war. Near a timber support post, a soldier leans with his head against the wall, eyes closed. His fingers curl loosely around a mug he hasn't lifted in several minutes. The tea inside has cooled, but he doesn't seem to mind. For him, the warmth of the mug has already served its purpose. It gave him a moment to pause, to anchor himself, to feel something gentle in a place that rarely allows gentleness. A few feet away, a man adjusts the bandage on his forearm with one hand, the other resting limply on his knee. He works slowly, tightening the fabric with careful motions. Not because the wound is serious, it isn't, but because every movement feels heavier at this hour. He checks the knot once, twice, then lets his arm fall into his lap with a quiet exhale. You drift toward a sheltered opening where 3 men lie on straw mats layered over crates. One sleeps on his side, breath steady and slow. Another lies on his back, eyes half open, thoughts drifting in a quiet haze. The third turns over with effort, pulling a blanket with him. His movement rustles the straw softly, a sound that feels more like a sigh than a disturbance. In a recessed corner, a lantern hangs from a nail hammered into the timber. Its light casts a narrow beam onto the face of a young private sitting beneath it. His shoulders slump forward. His hands rest loosely between his knees. He tries to stay awake. You can see it in the way he blinks hard, in the way his head dips and lifts again, but his exhaustion is stronger than his determination. Eventually, he lets his eyes close, just for a moment, just for the span of a breath. The lantern glows above him, steady and patient. Farther along, a sergeant sits on an ammunition box, massaging his calves with slow, tired hands. His boots are unlaced, tongues pulled forward, allowing what little air circulates here to reach his feet. He presses his thumbs into the sore muscles, leaning into each motion. He has done this countless times, yet tonight each gesture seems heavier than the last. You drift higher, watching how the reserve line shifts as the men settle further into their fatigue. Movements become gentler. Voices soften to whispers. The creak of wood, the rustle of blankets, the quiet lifting of cups, each sound blends into a steady, restful rhythm. Outside a dugout, a man rubs his face with both hands, dragging his fingertips slowly down from forehead to chin. When he lowers his hands, his expression is blank, not lost, simply emptied by the long weight of the day. He breathes in deeply, letting the cool air settle into his lungs, then steps inside to lie down. At the far edge of this section, a man kneels beside a basin, dipping a cloth into cool water. He presses it to the back of his neck, holding it there for several long seconds. The relief is subtle, quiet, but enough to ease the tension in his shoulders. When he finally lowers the cloth, he folds it neatly and sets it aside, preparing for a few hours of rest. You drift above the trench. From here, you can see tired bodies settling into whatever spaces offer warmth and stillness. You can hear slow breathing rising and falling in gentle patterns. You can feel the reserve line settling into a fragile equilibrium. Fatigue is a constant companion here. Not an enemy, but a reminder of how deeply these men have endured. It shapes them quietly, bending them just enough to make rest necessary, but never enough to break their spirit. In this dim, muted stretch of night, Ypres feels almost suspended, a place where time slows, where breaths deepen, where men reclaim strength one quiet moment at a time. Moments of a different kind. You drift into a quieter portion of the reserve line where the ground levels out, and the trench opens slightly. There is something different about this place. Not louder, not brighter, just touched by small attempts to create pockets of humanity in a landscape shaped by war. You settle near a section of timber wall where someone has placed a small row of stones along the edge of a boarded shelf. They are smooth, rounded, washed clean by rain, perhaps gathered from a river long before the Salient swallowed this man's days. Each stone sits carefully, as though arranged with intention, a tiny reminder that beauty can exist even here. Near the stones, a man sits cross-legged, carefully carving a piece of wood with a small pocket-knife. His hands move slowly, shaping the block with deliberate strokes. He isn't making anything grand, not a sculpture, not an ornament, just smoothing the edges, finding a rhythm that soothes the mind. The soft scrape of the blade against grain blends gently with the lantern glow around him. You move farther along. Two men sit close together on a pair of crates, passing the time with quiet conversation. Their shoulders lean slightly toward each other, not out of need, but out of familiarity. The trust between them is subtle, built from shared days and shared strain. One gestures softly with his hands as he speaks, the lantern outlining each movement in warm gold. The other listens with a calm steadiness, nodding occasionally, content simply to be present. A few steps away, a soldier kneels beside a wooden crate opened like a makeshift desk. He pulls out a small harmonica, examines it for a moment, then brings it to his lips. The melody he plays is simple, a slow sequence of notes that drift gently through the trench. It isn't meant to entertain. It isn't meant to fill the air. It simply floats, warm and soft, offering a reminder of something gentle beyond the mud. Men nearby pause to listen, not openly, not turning their heads, but quietly, in the way their breathing shifts and their shoulders ease. You drift toward a dugout where a lantern glows with steady warmth. Inside, a man sits with a book open on his lap. He traces the words line by line, not reading quickly but savoring each sentence. A companion sits beside him, eyes half closed, listening as the soft murmurs turn the trench into something more human. Farther along, a small fire rests inside a metal barrel. The flames are low, but the heat they give off draws a few men closer. They hold their hands toward it, letting warmth seep slowly into chilled skin. One man rolls a cigarette with practiced care, shaping the paper and tobacco with hands steadier than one might expect after such long days. When he lights it, the glow briefly illuminates his tired features before fading into the quiet. Near the fire, A soldier has removed his helmet and placed it beside him. From it, he pulls a small tin containing what remains of a ration of chocolate. He breaks it into tiny pieces, offering the largest to the friend beside him. The gesture is simple, humble, yet carries a weight that goes beyond the size of the treat. You drift a little higher. From above, these acts look small. A harmonica, a row of stones, a carved piece of wood, a story read aloud. But here, in the reserve line of Ypres, they shine quietly through the fatigue, the mud, and the long routines. They remind the men of who they were before the war, and of who they hope to be when it ends. These are moments of a different kind. Gentle, human, almost fragile. Moments that shape endurance as much as rations or rest. And as you watch them unfold, you sense how they bind the men together. Not through orders or duty, but through the soft resilience of shared humanity. You drift farther into the reserve line, drawn toward a pocket of light where the trench bends gently to the right. The walls widen here, just enough for men to sit without brushing their shoulders against damp timber. The air is warmer, quieter, steadier, shaped by the small rituals unfolding within it. Near a set of stacked crates, a soldier kneels with a tin of polish open beside him. His boots sit in front of him, still damp around the seams. He works slowly, circling the cloth across the leather with long, even strokes. He isn't polishing for show. There is no inspection coming. This is simply care, a way to reclaim a sense of normalcy, to make one small part of life feel orderly again. Beside him, his friend trims the loose threads from his coat with a pair of small scissors. The metal snips quietly, each cut creating a tiny moment of clarity in the dim air. He smooths the fabric with his palm, then folds the coat over his knee with a kind of precision that only comes from habit. You drift onward. Near the wall, a man carefully unwraps a small parcel tied with string. Inside, cushioned between layers of paper, rests a piece of fruit, slightly bruised but intact. He lifts it gently, turning it in his hands as though it were something fragile. When he finally takes a bite, he closes his eyes, letting the sweetness settle for a moment that feels almost sacred. He offers the next bite to the man sitting beside him, who accepts it with quiet gratitude. In another corner, a pair of soldiers prepare to play a simple game drawn on a flat board. The lines have been scratched into the wood long ago, probably by men who rotated out months before. They place small pebbles on the board, moving them with slow deliberation. The game itself doesn't matter. It's the act of playing, of focusing on something harmless, that brings the calm. You drift near a shelter where a man sits with a thin strip of paper balanced across his knee. He folds it carefully, creating a small, imperfect shape, a bird, perhaps, or something close to it. His fingers move with unhurried precision, a quiet rhythm born not from skill but from intention. When he finishes, he sets the folded shape on a ledge beside him. It looks fragile against the rough wood, yet it brightens the space in a way nothing else could. Farther along, a group of men sit in a loose circle, each holding a tin cup warmed by a stove nearby. Their shoulders lean just slightly toward one another as they listen to one of their companions describe the house he hopes to return to someday. A small garden, a narrow window overlooking a quiet street, a kitchen where morning sun falls across the table. His words are steady, his voice calm, painting a picture that drifts easily through the lantern-lit air. The others listen without interruption, not because the story is remarkable, but because it reminds them all of something gentle and steady that still exists beyond this place. You drift past them, moving toward a man sitting alone near a stretch of sandbags. He holds a thin piece of charcoal and sketches slowly in a small notebook. The lines he draws are simple, the curve of a trench wall, the edge of a lantern, the faint outline of a friend's profile. He sketches not to create beauty, but to hold on to moments that feel fleeting, a way of catching the world before it blurs again. He pauses, looks up at the lantern, then adds a final line before closing the book with quiet care. You rise slowly above the trench. Below you, these small acts form a tapestry of quiet resilience. Tiny gestures, simple comforts, shared warmth, soft music, hands creating, polishing, folding, repairing. None of it changes the war, but all of it changes the night. These moments drift through the reserve line like soft lights, flickering, gentle, persistent. They remind the men who they are beneath the mud and the weight of days. They remind them that there is still a part of themselves untouched by the salient. And as you float above the warm glow of lanterns and low voices, you feel the quiet power of these small human rituals, the ones that carry them through the long march back to the front. The return. You drift with the men as they prepare to leave the reserve line, the warmth of the dugout slowly giving way to the cool breath of the trench outside. Lanterns sway softly as they are lifted from hooks. Blankets are folded and set aside. Tin mugs are rinsed with measured care. The movements are not rushed, but they carry a gentle inevitability, the quiet understanding that rest is ending and the cycle must turn again. A soldier pulls on his greatcoat, shaking out the last folds before fastening the top button. He pats the pocket where his letter rests, feeling the faint crinkle beneath the wool. Another man rolls his shoulders, testing the looseness of muscles warmed by tea and stillness. He adjusts the strap of his pack with slow, deliberate motions, letting it settle against his back before tightening it by a single notch. You drift near the doorway as the first man steps outside. The night greets him with a soft touch of mist, curling around his silhouette like thin smoke. He pauses, allowing his eyes to adjust to the muted glow of the trench beyond. Then he breathes in, not deeply, not dramatically, just enough to carry the warmth with him. One by one, the others emerge, hands brushing against timber, boots finding familiar positions on the boards, bodies shifting into the posture of movement rather than rest. The lantern at the front swings gently, guiding their steps. You float above the group as they begin the slow walk back toward the support line. The trench bends in long, patient curves, its walls whispering with the sound of distant dripping. The boards creak under their boots, a soft counterpoint to the steady thud of feet, forming a rhythm the men know by heart. A soldier pauses briefly to tighten the strap of his helmet. Another breathes into his hands, rubbing warmth into his fingers before gripping his tool once more. Small rituals carried forward, fragments of the reserve line traveling with them into the darker sections ahead. You drift closer as the men approach a narrow bottleneck in the trench. The lantern-bearer slows, lifting the light slightly to illuminate a pool of water gathered between warped boards. Each man steps through it with care, boots making soft splashes that shimmer under the glow. The mist hangs low, turning the trench into a quiet corridor of breath and movement. Farther along, a mule and handler stand waiting near a junction. The mule shakes its head gently, breath rising in warm clouds. The handler strokes its neck, murmuring a soft reassurance before guiding it back toward deeper storage alcoves. Their silhouettes fade into the mist as the work party passes. You rise again, sensing the subtle shift that always comes at this stage of the rotation. Not fear, not dread, but a kind of inward settling. The men walk more quietly now. Their breaths fall into a shared cadence. Their steps sink without intention. This part of the return carries a weight the reserve line does not lift entirely. It's not a heavy burden, just a familiar one, worn smooth from repetition. A soldier near the center of the group touches the edge of the trench wall as he walks, letting his fingers trail across damp sandbags. Another hums under his breath, a soft, steady rhythm that blends into the quiet. Their shadows stretch and shorten with each swing of the lantern, moving in a slow pulse against the narrow walls. The trench widens briefly near a small alcove where tools are stored. The men pause, adjusting grips, checking straps, tightening gloves. One clears mud from the sole of his boot against a raised board. Another leans forward, stretching his back with a long, slow exhale. And then, without a word, they continue. You drift overhead as the lantern's glow grows smaller in the distance, swallowed by the curve of the trench. The reserve line recedes behind them. The support line waits just ahead, a place of duty, of labor, of the quiet needs that keep the front standing. This journey forward feels like stepping into a breath held by the earth itself, a breath that deepens with every step, preparing for the next tasks, the next quiet hours. The night around them is cool and steady. The earth holds its silence, and the rotation moves on. The men move deeper into the support line, their silhouettes lengthening and softening in the lantern's sway. The trench bends slowly to the right, revealing new pockets of shadow where moisture clings to sandbags in dark, glistening patches. Every few steps, you hear the faint shift of gear, a buckle settling, a strap adjusting, a quiet tap of metal against wool. One soldier brushes mud from his glove across his thigh, leaving a faint streak that blends into the fabric. He glances upward briefly, watching mist curl along the beams overhead. Then he lowers his head again, resuming the steady forward rhythm that carries the group onward. A man near the front pauses to adjust the lantern, lifting it slightly so the light reaches a narrow turn ahead. Its glow expands across the boards, revealing a shallow puddle they step around with the same practiced care they've shown all evening. The flame flickers once as the lantern swings, catching a glint of metal on a nearby tool rack. You drift closer to a pair of soldiers walking side by side. Neither speaks, but their steps fall in quiet harmony. One shifts his tool to the opposite shoulder and gives a small nod, as though acknowledging both the weight and the familiar comfort of it. The other tilts his head slightly, listening to the faint drip of water falling from a timber beam above. The sound repeats at intervals, slow, even, dependable. Farther back, a soldier tightens the strap of his pack once more. He pulls it snug across his chest, rolling his shoulders gently until it settles into a position he knows will feel right during the hours ahead. When he exhales, the breath leaves him in a soft cloud, drifting upward into the cool air before disappearing into the mist. You drift near the trench wall, watching a man touch the worn grain of a supporting beam as he passes. His fingers trace the grooves carved by months of use, shallow indentations where countless hands have steadied themselves during rotations just like this. The gesture is brief, but grounding, a reminder that he is part of a long, unbroken line. The men reach a wider bend where the trench floor rises slightly. They pause without speaking, letting the group compress before continuing. One soldier leans forward, stretching his back with a slow, deliberate motion that relieves the stiffness of the long walk. Another takes a sip from his canteen, then taps the cap once with his thumb before tucking it away. You drift above as they begin moving again, stepping carefully along the boards where the wood has grown uneven. The lantern's glow schemes across the puddles, forming elongated reflections that stretch and ripple with each passing boot. A faint rumble reaches the trench, distant, low, softened by miles of earth. The men don't react sharply. They simply absorb the sound, acknowledging it as part of the landscape, a familiar vibration that reminds them of where they stand in the great circle of the front. One soldier adjusts the cloth wrapped around his wrist. Another checks the small pocket where he keeps a pencil stub and a folded scrap of paper. Tiny motions, each carried out gently, each helping settle the mind into the cadence of the work ahead. You drift lower as the men approach a section of trench where the walls rise taller. The air grows cooler here, and the lantern's glow tightens into a narrower cone. They walk in single file, boots brushing against sandbags that sag slightly from the weight of the long season. A soldier near the back clears mud from the edge of his sleeve with a quiet swipe. He examines the stain briefly, then lets his hand fall. There is no frustration in the gesture, only acceptance. Mud, moisture, effort. This is the language of the rotation. As they near the end of the support line, the trench widens once more. The lantern swings in a slow arc, revealing the first outlines of the tools and timber they'll be working with. The shadows of braces and beams stretch across the boards like long, patient fingers. You drift above them, watching the group gather in a loose circle as the sergeant steps forward. He doesn't speak loudly. He doesn't gesture broadly. He simply raises the lantern a little higher, letting its light spill across the tools, the walls, the men. They look on with quiet understanding. This is the next step in the rhythm, the next curve of the cycle, the next stretch of night. And you feel the strength that comes from this kind of calm acceptance. Steady, unhurried, carried breath by breath into the deeper hours ahead. The men gather near the next section of the support line, the lantern's glow settling over them like a shawl of warm light. The night presses close now, quiet, cool, and steady. It carries no sense of urgency, only the quiet understanding that the rotation is turning again, bringing them toward the deeper hours ahead. The sergeant lowers the lantern slightly, allowing its glow to fall across the tools arranged in a neat row along the trench wall. Shovels, coils of wire, wooden braces, a small hand axe, everything placed with deliberate care after the last shift. The men step forward slowly, selecting what they'll need with the same quiet precision that shaped their work earlier in the night. You drift close to a soldier who tests the weight of a shovel in his hand. He grips it loosely at first, rolling his wrist to feel the balance. Then he shifts his fingers along the handle until the tool sits exactly where he wants it. He nods once, almost to himself, and steps back into formation. Another man lifts a coil of wire and rests it against his chest. He smooths a kink with his thumb, running his hand along its length in a slow, practiced gesture. The wire catches a thin line of lantern light, glowing faintly before disappearing back into shadow. A soft breeze moves through the trench. It brushes against the sandbags, carrying with it the cool scent of wet earth and distant smoke. The men lift their chins slightly, inhaling the shift. Then they resume their quiet readiness. You drift upward, watching how the lantern's glow creates shifting patterns along the walls, soft shadows, faint glimmers, dim reflections that move with the slightest sway of the flame. The mist above hangs low, turning the overhead beams into dark silhouettes against a pale, blurred sky. The sergeant takes a step forward. Not a command, not a call to action, just a small, steady movement that signals the next part of the night's rhythm. One by one, the men fall in behind him. Their boots find the boards with familiar precision. Their shoulders settle beneath the weight of tools and gear. Their breaths synchronize again, forming a quiet current of shared endurance. As they walk, you drift beside them. The trench narrows, then widens. It curves, then straightens. Its walls rise and fall with the contours of the land above, a land they rarely see but understand through the shifting textures beneath their feet. A soldier near the center pauses briefly to adjust the strap of his pack. Another reaches down to scrape wet mud from the heel of his boot against a raised board. Simple motions, quiet and careful, each one holding a small piece of the larger rhythm. You drift toward the front of the group as they reach a place where the ground dips slightly. Water gathers here in a broad, shallow puddle. The lantern-bearer raises the light a little higher, guiding the men around the edge where the boards are less submerged. Their reflections ripple softly across the surface, broken by the smallest vibrations of their steps. Up ahead, a lone beam hangs low across the trench roof. One soldier reaches up to steady it, not because it's in danger of falling, but because the gesture has become instinctive. He touches the wood gently, then lets his hand slide away as he passes beneath. You drift overhead as the men approach the final stretch before the deeper work ahead. Nothing about their movements is rushed. Nothing forced. The rotation has taught them to move with patience, not speed. The trench widens one last time, creating a small open pocket where they pause. They gather around the lantern, forming a quiet ring of silhouettes in the mist. Their breaths pulse softly, rising and fading in the cool air. One man adjusts his gloves. Another wipes condensation from the edge of his sleeve. A third lifts his chin, letting the faint air drift across his face before lowering it again. The sergeant looks at them, not with command, not with pressure, but with a calm, steady presence that settles the group even further. He lowers the lantern between them. The glow becomes the center of everything, reflected in damp boards, faint on metal edges, soft on wool, warm on tired faces. No words are spoken. None are needed. The men stand in quiet readiness, breathing in the stillness before the next motion, and the night, patient and unhurried, holds them gently in this small circle of light. You drift above, sensing the shift as the moment lengthens. A breath stretched across the heart of the rotation, a pause before effort, a stillness before movement. And then, slowly, the lantern rises again. The men step forward. The tools shift in their hands. Their shadows stretch along the boards. The return is complete, and the next hour of the night begins. Work parties at night. You drift toward a junction where the reserve line begins to bend and narrow. The lanterns here burn lower, wrapped inside small wire cages to keep the flame steady against the damp night air. Beyond this point, the world shifts again, not into danger, but into effort. Quiet, steady, necessary effort that holds the entire line together. A work party gathers slowly, forming a loose circle around a crate where tools have been laid out with deliberate order. Shovels, picks, coils of wire, a few lengths of timber. The men look at them with calm recognition, as though greeting old companions. They know the tasks waiting ahead. They know the mud, the weight, the slow rhythm of hauling and repairing. You drift above them as a sergeant gives gentle instructions. His voice is low, soft, shaped by the understanding that nothing needs to be said loudly here. The men nod, lifting tools with slow, measured movements. They check straps, tighten gloves, settle their feet on the duckboards. One man adjusts a lantern on its hook, guiding its glow across the narrow path they'll take. The light catches droplets of moisture clinging to sandbags, making them shimmer faintly like dew on early morning grass. But this is no morning. It is deep night, the hour when the front line breathes differently. The work party begins to move. You drift with them into the narrower trench. Here, the walls press closer. The boards beneath their feet shift with each step, making soft wooden sighs. Above, the sky is a pale smear behind the tangled netting and beams. Mist clings to everything, softening the edges of sandbags, muffling footsteps, turning the air into a cool, heavy blanket. The men walk without conversation, not out of fear, but because the work ahead demands a kind of inward focus. Every breath is measured. Every step is deliberate. A man at the front holds a lantern, its glow forming a gentle orb around him. Others follow its light, shadows of their helmets drifting across the walls like slow-moving leaves. You follow the group to the first task, a sagging stretch of trench wall where the weight of rain has pushed the earth inward. Timber braces lie stacked nearby, waiting to be lifted into place. The men set their tools down carefully, each movement quiet, controlled. Two soldiers begin digging away the softest soil, carving a shallow recess where the brace will fit. Their shovels sink into the mud with a muted rhythm, a sound that feels more like breathing than labor. Another man holds the lantern higher, watching for signs of shifting earth. You hover near him, sensing how his hands steady as the light falls across the scene. The others lift the timber beam together. No one speaks. The coordination is instinctive, a practiced harmony shaped by months of shared work. The beam settles into the recess with a soft thud, its weight resting evenly against the newly cleared space. A man wipes moisture from his brow. Another checks the alignment with a small nod. The lantern glows softly over all of them, warming the damp air by a fraction. They move onward. You drift with them to the next task, a collapsed firing step where boards have split under the pressure of water and constant use. The men kneel, clearing debris with their hands. They move slowly, carefully, aware that even small sounds travel through the earth. One soldier hums under his breath, barely audible, a simple tune that blends with the night rather than cutting through it. The new boards are placed down one by one, each tested before the next is added. The men take their time. No one rushes. There is no point in hurrying something that must carry weight in the days ahead. Farther along, a pair of soldiers work on a drainage channel, a narrow trench carved beneath the duckboards. Mud and water pool there, shimmering with lantern reflection. They scoop it out with steady motions, their movements shaping the water into small ripples that catch the dim light like shifting metal. The party continues. You rise above them as they move toward a wider section where a mound of tangled wire waits to be cleared. The men take up metal cutters and gloves, working with slow, precise motions. The sound of clipped wire is faint, softened by mist. Each piece is set aside neatly, forming a small pile that will be carried back later. The lantern swings gently overhead, its glow brushing across their faces. The night air smells of earth, damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of wire. Near the end of the route, the men pause to rest for a moment. They lean on tools, catching breath in soft silence. One man takes a sip from his canteen. Another adjusts the strap on his helmet. You linger with them, sensing the quiet strength that comes not from battle, but from work done with patience and persistence. Work that keeps the trenches standing. Work that keeps the rotation cycle moving. Work that does not make history books, but without it, nothing else would stand. After a few minutes, the sergeant gives a small nod. The lantern is lifted. The tools are gathered. The party moves on. The night closes softly around them as they begin the slow journey back toward the support line, their silhouettes steady against the dim glow of lantern light. The work is not finished. It never is. But for now, this part is complete, and you drift beside them as they carry its quiet weight into the next hour of the night. You follow the work party as they move deeper into the support line, their silhouettes stretching and shrinking with each slow swing of the lantern. The trench narrows again, the walls leaning inward as though trying to listen. Every sound feels softened here, the muted clink of metal, the gentle rustle of wool, the steady breath of men who have learned to pace themselves through long hours. Ahead, the path dips slightly, revealing a shallow pool glistening on the duckboards. The lantern-bearer pauses, raising the light just enough to guide the others. The reflections shimmer like wavering amber, disturbed only when a boot passes through them, calm and unhurried. The men gather around a section of trench where the wall has bowed outward. The sandbags here sag under the weight of recent rain, their seams stretched and dark. The soldiers set down their tools carefully, their movements almost ritualistic. One man kneels, pressing his glove against the wall to test its firmness. Another unfolds a length of wire netting, shaking it out so it drapes smoothly. You drift close as they begin working. A soldier drives a wooden stake into the mud, pushing with steady pressure rather than force. His companion adjusts the netting, securing it with practiced motions. The faint scraping sound blends with the hum of night air. No one speaks, but the coordination flows effortlessly, a quiet choreography born from repetition and shared understanding. Down the line, another pair of men examine a timber strut resting against the wall. They tilt it slightly, measuring its angle against the collapsed earth. One lifts a lantern higher, illuminating the small gap that needs to be carved. They mark the point with a gloved finger, then begin scraping away the soft mud, scooping it into neat piles along the base of the trench. You drift higher for a moment, watching how the lantern glow forms small islands of warmth amid the vast, cold darkness of the Salient. Each island holds its own quiet purpose, one group repairing sandbags, another clearing water, another reinforcing timber supports. The tasks differ, but the rhythm stays the same: slow, steady, calm. A soldier wipes the back of his hand across his forehead, leaving a smear of mud he doesn't notice. He leans against the wall for a moment, letting his breath steady before he returns to his work. Another man rotates his wrist gently, easing stiffness from long hours of lifting and digging. They continue without complaint, moving not with urgency but with deliberate patience. The work party progresses to a bend in the trench where a stack of sandbags has burst open, spilling dark earth across the boards. The men kneel together, lifting the torn bags with careful hands. Although the ground is soft, their movements remain measured. They do not rush the task. They place new sandbags down, patting the tops to settle their contents. A lantern hangs from a low beam, its flame flickering with every shift of the men beneath it. Shadows climb and fall across the wall, making it look almost alive. The mist catches on the flame's edge, softening its glow into a gentle haze. You drift closer to one soldier tightening the rope around a timber post. He pulls slowly, testing the tension before tying the knot. When he steps back, he pauses for a brief moment, looking down the length of the trench as though listening to something only he can hear. Not a sound, but the feel of the night, the way the trench breathes. Farther down, a pair of soldiers begin scooping silt from the drainage channel. Their shovels work in a slow rhythm. Mud lifts, drops, lifts, drops. The water clears around their movements, revealing wooden beams beneath. One man stops to wipe his glove on his coat, leaving a faint streak of mud across faded fabric. You drift above them as the sergeant walks the length of the work, quietly checking each repaired section. He touches the new braces, tests the reinforced wall, studies the drainage. His expression stays calm, thoughtful. No criticism, just careful appraisal. The men watch him silently, waiting for the slightest nod of approval. When he gives it, they move on. The work party reaches the end of the section assigned for the night. They gather their tools, folding wire, lifting planks, wiping mud from shovel blades. Everything moves with a slow efficiency, shaped by long hours and long months of the same rotation. No tool is rushed, no movement careless. Even fatigue becomes part of the rhythm. A soldier lifts the lantern again. Its circle of light steadies. The silhouettes around it begin the quiet walk back. As they retrace their steps through the mist, The smell of damp wool and earth follows them. Their boots thud softly against the duckboards, forming a faint, steady heartbeat through the trench. You drift above, watching them move like a single organism, not fast, not slow, but balanced. The night wraps them gently, folding them into its quiet. The work is done, and the long walk back begins. Waiting between orders. You drift with the men as they return from their night's work, the lantern's glow swaying gently between them like a heartbeat guiding their steps. The trench stretches ahead in a long, narrowing ribbon of mud and timber, but now the air feels different, not heavy with effort and not yet shaped by rest. Instead, it holds a quiet kind of pause, a place between tasks, a moment that doesn't belong fully to night or morning, a breath held by the salient itself. The work party slows near a wider trench junction where fresh timber braces rise in careful lines. The sergeant instructs them to wait while he checks the next section for stability. His words are soft, barely more than a whisper. The men nod, shifting their weight, settling into their own small versions of stillness. You hover near them. One soldier leans his back against the sandbag wall, arms resting loosely at his sides. His breath leaves him in a slow, steady stream, warming the air just long enough for the mist to swallow it again. He lifts his helmet slightly, scratching the back of his head with a gloved finger before settling it again in place. Another man crouches beside a wooden crate, adjusting the straps of his pack with deliberate care. He pulls each one through its buckle, testing tension, listening to the quiet scrape of fabric. He doesn't hurry. There is no need. The waiting has its own rhythm. A third soldier sits on a raised trench step, boots planted firmly on the wet boards. He rolls his shoulders back, feeling the subtle stretch relieve a tightness that has crept in over hours of bending and lifting. His face softens as the stiffness eases, not a smile, not even relief, just a small shift inward. You drift a little higher, watching how the lantern light reflects gently off the boards and the shimmer of shallow puddles. The trench feels almost peaceful in this pause, its angles softened by fog and low flame. Farther down the line, two men stand shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, not moving much, simply sharing the same pocket of silence. One rubs warmth into his palms, then rests both hands on the handle of his shovel. The other shifts slightly and leans on a timber post, letting his weight settle through tired legs. Their breaths rise in small clouds that merge before fading. A soldier at the end of the group takes a slow sip from his canteen. The water glints briefly in the lantern glow. He caps it gently, then taps the side once with a finger, not out of habit, but out of quiet satisfaction. His shoulders ease as he exhales. You drift closer to a narrow recess carved into the trench wall where a man sits alone, elbows resting on his knees. He watches the lantern light flicker against timber beams overhead, tracing the shifting patterns with calm eyes. Now and then, he reaches down to adjust the edge of his boot, or brushes mud from his trousers in long, unhurried strokes. Nothing urgent here. Nothing rushed. Only the soft unfolding of a moment suspended between one duty and the next. You sense the collective body of the work party settling into this stillness. Their breaths deepen. Their shoulders lower. The familiar hum of the trench, water dripping, timber creaking, wind sighing against sandbags, becomes a quiet backdrop instead of a weight to fight against. The sergeant returns. He doesn't bark orders. There is no need. He simply raises a hand and gestures for them to follow. The men rise slowly, tools lifted into calm grips, boots adjusting against the boards. The waiting is over, and the next small movement of the night begins. You drift with them as they continue along the trench, this time toward a small storage recess where they will prepare the final tasks of the shift. The fog thickens briefly, curling around their silhouettes like a soft shawl. The lantern glows through it, forming a halo of warm gold in the cool air. This is how the night breathes in Ypres, not in sudden moments, but in the gentle alternation between action and pause. And in this space between orders, you feel the quiet resilience that has carried these men through so many nights, a strength not spoken, not displayed, but lived quietly in these soft, suspended moments of waiting. You drift with the men as they continue toward the storage recess, moving at a pace shaped not by urgency, but by the lingering quiet that fills the moments between tasks. Their shadows stretch and shrink along the trench walls, bending softly with each swing of the lantern. The night has settled deeper now, becoming a calm presence around them. At the recess, the men set their tools down carefully, leaning shovels against timber posts and placing wire coils neatly onto crates. The faint clink of metal onward echoes through the narrow corridor, softened instantly by the damp air. Each man falls into a small routine. One checks the edges of his gloves, another adjusts the collar of his greatcoat, a third rolls his shoulders slowly to ease the remaining stiffness. You drift closer. A soldier kneels beside a crate and wipes mud from the handle of his tool with long, steady motions. He studies the grain of the wood for a moment, then rests the tool across his knees. His breath moves in slow, even waves, shaped by the comfort of a brief pause after steady work. Near him, another man sits on a low step carved into the trench wall. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the warmth from the lantern reach his face. His helmet rests loosely in his lap, one hand curved over its rim. It is not sleep, just a moment of gentle stillness where the body acknowledges its own weight. Two soldiers stand side by side near the end of the recess. One tugs lightly at his bootlaces, tightening them by instinct. The other adjusts the strap of his pack, sliding his fingers under the fabric to feel for the familiar imprint of a letter tucked inside. He presses the edge once, ensuring it's still there, then lets his hand fall quietly to his side. You drift above them. The trench feels different in these minutes. Not a place of labor, not a place of rest, but something in between. A place where light, silence, and breath merge into a rhythm that belongs only to the waiting. Even the fog seems gentler here, curling softly through the narrow passage like a slow-moving tide. A faint gust moves over the trench, carrying with it the smell of damp wood and distant smoke. The men shift subtly as it passes, adjusting their coats, leaning closer to the lantern's warmth. The boards beneath their boots creak softly, as though acknowledging their presence. One soldier takes out a small tin from his pocket and opens it carefully. Inside is a single piece of hard candy. He breaks it in half without a word and hands one piece to the friend beside him. The friend accepts it with a quiet nod. They place the pieces in their mouths, letting the sweetness dissolve slowly. Neither speaks. The gesture itself is enough. Farther down the recess, another man crouches low, drawing a small line in the mud with the tip of his finger. He doesn't seem to be sketching anything particular, just tracing slow curves, letting his mind drift while his hand repeats a gentle, calming motion. You hover closer and watch his breath rise in a thin cloud, steady and unhurried. A sergeant steps into the lantern glow, his boots pressing firmly onto the boards. He looks over the group with calm eyes, pausing briefly on each man, as though silently taking measure of their readiness. His presence brings no tension, only a shift in posture, straightening backs, quiet inhalations, the subtle gathering of attention. He gives a small nod. The waiting ends. The men lift their tools once more. Blankets along the trench wall settle as they move past. A lantern's shadow sways gently across timber beams. You rise as the group begins the slow walk toward the next section of the support line. The boards thud softly under their boots, forming a gentle rhythm that carries them forward. Mist gathers again around the edges of their silhouettes, rising with each step. Between tasks, the world moves quietly. Between orders, the night deepens. And in these spaces of stillness, you see the shape of their endurance more clearly than anywhere else. It is not loud. It is not heroic. It is simply present. A steady breath carried through the hours between effort and rest. The long path forward. You rise slowly from the reserve line, letting its warm lanterns and soft murmurs fall gently behind you. The trench narrows again, pulling the men into a thin column that moves with quiet purpose. Their boots press into the damp boards with steady rhythm, each step carrying a piece of the rest they've just received, fragile but real. Above them, the sky shifts from a muted grey to a deeper blue. No stars pierce the cloud cover. The Salient often hides the heavens, as if the sky itself cannot bear witness to the long cycles of endurance below. The air grows cooler, sharper. You drift through it like a slow breath. The men move forward in small groups, each keeping a respectful distance from the next. They walk without speaking, not out of fear, but because the reserve line's quiet remains inside them, a lingering warmth they do not want to disturb. You hover over a narrow junction where the path turns. Here, a soldier pauses to adjust the strap of his pack. Another shifts the weight of a tool resting on his shoulder. A third presses his hand briefly against the trench wall, grounding himself before stepping into the darker stretch ahead. No one hurries. No one hesitates. They simply move. The boards creak softly. Lanterns flicker behind them. The scent of tea, smoke, and warm air fades into the cooler breath of the night. You drift with them as the walls rise slightly, reinforced with fresh timber laid earlier in the week. Water trickles through narrow drainage channels, making quiet music beneath the boards. The trench curves left, then right, guiding them deeper into the winding veins that connect this vast network of earth. Farther ahead, faint murmurs drift backward from the support line, the sound of men preparing tools, checking equipment, and settling into the rhythm of night work. The men from the reserve will join them soon, blending their newly restored calm with the steady effort required to hold the line. A single flare rises far in the distance, its glow faint and soft from where you drift. The men do not react beyond a slow lift of the eyes. They register the direction, the brightness, the silence that follows. Then they continue walking, step by step, board by board, breath by quiet breath. You rise higher. From above, the trench resembles a long river of wood, cloth, and human endurance winding across the dark fields. Lanterns mark its curves like beads on a string, each one glowing softly against the night. The men below appear as small silhouettes moving through a vast, patient landscape shaped by years of conflict. Nothing here is rushed. Nothing here is loud. The Salient shifts on its own slow axis, and the men move in harmony with it, not by choice, but by necessity. As they advance toward the support line, you sense their calm deepening, not fading. Rest may be ending, but its quiet strength remains folded inside them like a letter tucked into a pocket. Ahead lies the familiar world of mud, timber, water, and night work. Beyond that lies the front. Beyond that lies endurance, the kind that grows not from courage, but from persistence. You drift above them, feeling the weight of their journey and the quiet power of their return. This is not a story of battles. It is a story of movement, cycles, rhythms, the slow, steady turning of days that shape men far more deeply than any moment of sudden danger. As the lanterns of the reserve fade behind you, and the darker path of the support line rises ahead. You sense how the Salient holds all of this together. Every step, every breath, every quiet moment lived between rotations. The night closes gently around you. The men walk on, and the long path forward stretches out, soft, steady, and unbroken. A quiet breath between night and dawn. You drift above the trench as the men move deeper into their tasks, and something in the night begins to shift, not sharply, not suddenly, but like a slow turning of the earth beneath their boots. The darkness softens at its edges. The mist hangs lower, thicker, gathering its own quiet weight. A faint sense of change lingers in the air, even though nothing visible has begun. This is the hour that doesn't belong to night or morning. A narrow space between breaths. A place where motion slows and the earth listens. The men continue their steady labor, lifting boards, shaping supports, clearing mud from narrow channels. Their movements blend into the trench's natural soundscape. The soft scrape of tools, the steady clack of boots against wet wood, the occasional shift of timber settling into place. None of it is loud. None of it breaks the quiet. It simply fills the spaces where silence chooses not to rest. You drift along the trench and feel how the world tightens into this moment of in-between. The lanterns glow differently now, their light no longer pushing against the night, but instead resting softly upon it. Shadows grow rounder, gentler. The air seems to thicken with the breath of countless rotations. A soldier pauses to straighten his glove. Another lifts his head toward the pale sky, where no stars show but where the shape of dawn lies hidden behind the mist. A third touches the edge of a timber beam as he passes, grounding himself with a gesture that has become part of his quiet language. None of them speak, not because they must remain silent, but because this hour invites reflection more than conversation. You climb higher through the mist, watching how the trench coils through the landscape like a long, earthen thread. It feels small and vast at the same time, a thin corridor carved by hands, yet stretching into a horizon shaped by the weight of war. In this suspended hour, even the smallest details seem to hold more meaning. The faint steam rising from a man's breath, the slow drip of water from the timber overhead, the soft rhythm of tools shaping the earth, the glow of a lantern reflected in a shallow pool. These moments are not dramatic. They do not mark turning points in battle. They do not alter the course of history, but they shape the men who move through them. This in-between hour gives them space to remember the warmth of the reserve line, to steady their breath before the next task, to hold the fragile balance between effort and rest, to carry the soft heat of lanterns and letters and blankets into the cold work ahead. You drift down again, sensing how the last traces of the reserve line's warmth cling to the men's coats. You feel how the cool air brushes gently across their faces. You see how their silhouettes fold into the mist like notes on a slow, low melody. And as night begins its gradual surrender, not to light, but to another kind of quiet, you follow the men into the heart of the rotation. The hour deepens, the breath holds, and the aftermath prepares to unfold, gently, quietly, like dawn learning how to rise. Aftermath. What stays with you after the rotations fade? When the last lantern dims behind them and the reserve line dissolves into distance, you drift higher, carried by the steady rhythm of the men returning to their posts. The night folds around them with the calm certainty of something that has seen countless rotations, countless shifts, countless quiet marches like this one. The path ahead is familiar, yet never the same. The boards have shifted. The mud has deepened. The air carries a new scent of cold or damp or old smoke that has settled again in the timber. From above, You watch the column move with a kind of gentle determination. Not bold, not hurried, just steady. The men do not think of heroism. They do not think of sacrifice. They think of steps, of breath, of the small warmth still lingering from tea, from sleep, from letters held close to the heart. You drift with them as the trench curves and narrows, guiding them through the quiet spaces between danger and routine. Every rotation adds something to them, a new line in the face, a new ache in the shoulders, a new way of measuring the landscape by sound and smell instead of sight. And every rotation takes something too. Yet the men walk with a softness that defies the weight they carry, a softness shaped by the moments they gathered in the reserve line, the warm cup, the folded letter, the melody of a harmonica drifting through dim air. Small things, fragile things, but strong enough to hold them upright as they move toward the darker places. You rise slightly, seeing the entire scene from above, a winding thread of human endurance stitched into a landscape that has learned to swallow nearly everything except the quiet persistence of those who move through it. The night deepens, the trench walls rise, and the men step into a rhythm older than any one of them. Their breaths join a long chorus of breaths that came before. Their footsteps fall where thousands of others have fallen. Their small murmurs echo the same calm resolve spoken years ago, months ago, or only last week. In this place, time stretches and folds in ways that do not belong to clocks or calendars. Days repeat, nights blend, rotations cycle, and still the salient remains, shaped by mud, by water, by memory, and by the men who pass through it like tides. You drift lower again. A lantern flickers against the far wall, casting faint ripples across the boards. A man adjusts his pack. Another looks briefly at the sky where no stars shine. A third touches the letter in his pocket, feeling its folded edges as though reminding himself that something quiet awaits beyond this place. No words are needed. The understanding runs deeper than speech. This march is not a return to danger. It is a return to duty, a slow merging of calm and endurance, shaped by cycles that hold these men together. As you move with them, you sense how strange this world becomes once the salient settles into your bones. The cold feels familiar. The dampness feels expected. The slow rumble of distant guns becomes part of the air, as inevitable as wind. Even the mud becomes a language, telling you where the boards shift, where the water gathers, where the earth changes from hour to hour. The men do not fight this world. They adapt to it, bend with it, move through it with a kind of patient grace that the outside world will never fully understand. You rise again. Beyond the support line lies the front, not visible yet, but sensed. A thinning of air, a distant shimmer of light. The faint feeling that the landscape ahead listens differently, breathes differently, waits differently. But this moment, here in the space between, holds its own power. It is the quiet before another long stretch, the breath held before the next rhythm begins. The last warm echo of the reserve line carried gently into the darker hours. And as you drift above them, you feel the weight and the wonder of what it means to endure a place like Ypres. Not through force, not through victory, but through presence, staying, returning, continuing. A lantern fades behind the corner. A board creaks beneath a steady boot. The night folds them into its slow, patient embrace. Nothing here is dramatic. Nothing here is loud. And perhaps that is why these moments linger longest. The calm march, the quiet breath, the soft edge of exhaustion mixing with readiness, the knowledge that they will face the same world again, and again, and again, and still walk forward. You drift one last time above the winding trench. its curves glowing faintly in the night like lines drawn across an old map, its men moving with a unity shaped not by command, but by shared endurance. They step, they breathe, they continue, and in their slow, steady movement you find something fragile and profound, a quiet echo that will outlast the mud, the timber, and even the war itself. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.